The room is cold. Not from the air, from the silence. It's 1973, and the space smells like wood and old carpet and cigarette smoke that never quite leaves. There are amps stacked against the walls, guitar cases lying open like mouths, cables coiled on the floor. The kind of place where sound is supposed to happen. But right now, there's nothing. Glenn Frey stands near the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes are on the door. He's waiting. Don Henley sits behind the drum kit, sticks in hand, but he's not playing. He's watching Glenn. Randy Meisner is tuning his bass, but his hands are slow, distracted. Bernie Leadon leans against the wall, trying to look like he's not part of this, but he is. Everyone in this room is part of this. Jackson Browne is supposed to walk through that door in 10 minutes. He doesn't know what's waiting for him. Glenn hasn't said much all morning. He showed up early, which isn't like him. He made coffee, drank it in silence, then set the cup down hard enough that everyone looked up. That's when they knew. Something had shifted. Don asked once, "You good?" Glenn didn't answer. He just looked at the door again. Now the tension sits in the room like a third person. Nobody wants to name it. Nobody wants to be the one to ask. But they all feel it. Glenn Frey is not a man who loses his temper easily. He's sharp, controlled, careful with his words. That's what makes this worse. When Glenn goes quiet, it means something's burning underneath. Jackson Browne is a friend. That's the part that makes this hard. He's not a stranger. He's not some industry guy they tolerate. He's been in the room with them. He's played guitar on their tracks. He's written songs that sit next to theirs on the radio. He's the kind of guy who shows up to help, who stays late, who doesn't ask for credit. But something happened. Glenn won't say what. Not yet, but the others can feel it in the way he's standing, in the way his shoulders are locked, in the way he keeps checking the clock. The door opens. Jackson walks in with his guitar case slung over one shoulder, a notebook under his arm, and that easy California smile that makes people feel safe. He's wearing jeans and a faded blue shirt, hair long and loose, eyes bright. He looks like someone who just came from writing a song about sunlight and open roads. "Hey," he says, setting the case down gently. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic on Sunset was brutal. Nobody answers." Jackson looks around. Randy's staring at his bass. Bernie's looking at the floor. Don's holding his sticks like he forgot what they're for. Then Jackson's eyes land on Glenn. Glenn doesn't move. He doesn't smile. He just looks at Jackson with an expression that's hard to read. Not anger, not disgust, but something colder. Something final. "Jackson," Glenn says quietly, "we need to talk." Jackson's smile fades. He nods slowly, like he's been expecting this, like maybe he's known for days that this moment was coming. "Yeah," he says. "Okay." Glenn steps forward, not close, just enough to own the space. "You can't be here anymore." The words land like stones. Jackson blinks. He doesn't argue. He doesn't ask why. He just stands there holding the strap of his guitar case and waits. "I'm serious," Glenn continues, his voice steady, almost too steady. "You're not welcome at rehearsals. Not anymore." Don shifts in his seat. Bernie looks up. Randy sets his bass down carefully, like he's afraid any sound will break something that can't be fixed. Jackson takes a breath. His jaw tightens, just a little. "Glenn, don't." Glenn cuts him off, not loud, just firm. "I don't want to hear it." Jackson closes his mouth. His eyes drop to the floor for a second, then come back up. There's hurt there. Real hurt. But he doesn't fight it. He doesn't defend himself. He just nods. "All right," Jackson says, softly. "I'll go." He picks up his guitar case. He tucks the notebook under his arm. He looks at the others, Randy, Bernie, Don, but none of them meet his eyes. They can't. This isn't their decision, but it's happening in front of them, and that makes them part of it. Jackson turns toward the door. "Jackson," Glenn says. Jackson stops. Doesn't turn around, just waits. Glenn's voice is quieter now. You know why. Jackson stands there for a long moment. His back is to them. His shoulders rise and fall once like he's holding something in. Then he nods. Just once. And he walks out. The door closes. The room is silent again. Don sets his sticks down. Randy exhales. Bernie rubs his face with both hands. Nobody asks Glenn what just happened. Nobody says Jackson's name. They just sit there, in the space where their friend used to be, and let the weight of it settle. Glenn walks back to the window. He lights a cigarette. His hands are steady. But his eyes aren't. The story didn't start in that room. It started weeks earlier, in a different kind of space, one filled with laughter, wine, late-night guitars, and the kind of closeness that makes people forget to be careful. Jackson Browne and Phyllis Major were together, not married, but together in the way that mattered. She was an actress, a model, someone who moved through rooms like light through glass. People noticed her, not because she demanded it, but because she had a presence, a gentleness, a sadness maybe, something that made you want to protect her even if you didn't know why. Jackson loved her. That much was clear. But love doesn't always mean stability. Jackson was on the road. Jackson was writing. Jackson was building something, and Phyllis was there, but not always. The space between them grew, not from cruelty, but from distance, from time, from the way two people can love each other and still drift. Glenn Frey knew Phyllis. Not well. Not the way Jackson did. But enough to see her at parties, to talk to her when the music stopped, to notice when she seemed too quiet, too far away. Glenn wasn't looking for anything. He wasn't circling. But he saw her. And maybe she saw him. Nobody knows exactly when it happened. Nobody knows if it was one night or many, but somewhere in the blur of 1973, while Jackson was gone, while the road stretched long and empty, Glenn and Phyllis were not strangers anymore. And Jackson found out. It's hard to say what hurts more, the betrayal itself, or the fact that it came from someone you trusted. Glenn wasn't just another musician. He wasn't just someone in the scene. He was a friend, the kind of friend you let into your life, into your circle, into the rooms where your guard is down. And now, he was the reason Phyllis looked away when Jackson came home. Jackson didn't yell. That's not who he was. He didn't throw things. He didn't call Glenn in the middle of the night and scream. He just went quiet. He wrote. He turned the pain into something he could hold, something he could shape, something that wouldn't swallow him whole. But the music couldn't fix it. The songs couldn't undo what had been done. And when Jackson walked into that rehearsal space weeks later, carrying his guitar and his notebook and his broken trust, Glenn knew. He knew Jackson knew. And that's why the door had to close, because some things can't be rehearsed through. Some wounds don't heal in the same room. The days after Jackson left were strange. The band tried to move forward. They ran through songs, worked on harmonies, talked about the next album like nothing had changed. But something had. The air felt thinner. The jokes didn't land the same way. When someone mentioned Jackson's name by accident, the room went quiet for a beat too long. Don Henley was the first one to bring it up, days later, when it was just him and Glenn in the parking lot after a session. "You gonna tell us what happened?" Don asked, leaning against his car, arms crossed. Glenn didn't look at him. He stared out at the street, at the cars passing, at the sun setting behind the buildings. "No," he said simply. Don waited. He knew Glenn well enough to know that silence didn't always mean the conversation was over. Sometimes it just meant Glenn was deciding how much to say. "It's personal," Glenn added after a moment. His voice was flat, tired. "It's between me and him." Don nodded slowly. He didn't push. He didn't ask again. Because whatever had happened, it was clear that Glenn was carrying it alone. And maybe that was the only way he knew how. Inside the rehearsal space, the others felt it too. Randy Meisner, who had always been the quietest, started showing up late. Bernie Leadon played his parts perfectly, but left as soon as they were done. The chemistry that had made the Eagles sharp and tight and dangerous was still there, but underneath it, something had cracked. They didn't talk about Jackson. They didn't talk about Phyllis. They just played. And the music was good. It was always good. But it didn't feel the same. Phyllis Major didn't know she was caught in the middle of something that would never fully resolve. She didn't ask to be the point where two friendships fractured. She was just trying to survive. Trying to make sense of her own loneliness. Trying to find something solid in a world that kept shifting under her feet. She loved Jackson. That was true. But love isn't always enough to fill the empty spaces. And when Glenn showed up, steady, present, there, she didn't plan it. She didn't scheme. She just fell. And when Jackson found out, when the truth came to light, Phyllis was left holding the weight of two men's pain. She saw the way Jackson looked at her now. Not with anger, with sadness. With the kind of disappointment that's worse than rage, because it means something broke that can't be fixed. She saw the way Glenn avoided her after that, the way he didn't call, the way he looked past her at parties like if he didn't make eye contact the guilt wouldn't be real. And she felt it all. The shame, the confusion, the unbearable heaviness of being the reason two people who mattered couldn't stand to be in the same room. Phyllis tried to hold on. She went to therapy. She wrote in journals. She took long walks and tried to remind herself that she deserved to exist, to make mistakes, to be human. But the weight kept growing. The silence kept getting louder. And the world kept moving forward without waiting for her to catch up. In 1976, 3 years after that closed door, Phyllis Major took her own life. She left behind a note that no one has ever shared. She left behind a young son, Ethan, who would grow up without her. She left behind Jackson, who would spend the next decade writing songs about love and loss and the unbearable cost of not being able to save someone. And she left behind Glenn, who never spoke about her publicly, who carried whatever happened between them in a place no interviews could reach. The Eagles went on to become one of the biggest bands in the world. Hotel California, Take It Easy, Desperado. They sold millions of records. They filled stadiums. They became legends. Jackson Browne became one of the most respected songwriters of his generation, The Pretender, Running on Empty, Somebody's Baby. His voice became the sound of heartbreak and hope, of trying and failing and trying again. But neither of them ever spoke about that day. Neither of them ever explained what really happened. The door closed in 1973, and it stayed closed. There are no villains in this story. That's the part that makes it unbearable. There's no moment where you can point and say, there. That's where it all went wrong. because it's all wrong. And it's all understandable. Phyllis was lonely. Jackson was gone. Glenn was there, and somewhere in the space between intention and consequence, everything collapsed. Glenn didn't ban Jackson out of cruelty. He did it because he couldn't face him. Because shame doesn't come with speeches. It hides in silence, in avoidance, in the closing of doors. Jackson didn't fight because he knew. He knew that some betrayals cut too deep to argue about. He knew that walking away was the only way to protect what was left of himself. And Phyllis was just trying to be seen, trying to matter, trying to hold on. 3 people, 3 kinds of pain, and no way to make it right. Years later, long after the Eagles had broken up and reunited, long after Glenn Frey had become a solo artist and a father and a man with gray in his hair, someone asked him about Jackson Browne. Glenn paused. He looked down at his hands. Then, he said, "We were young. We made mistakes." He didn't say more. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize or defend. He just acknowledged that something had been broken, and that time doesn't always fix everything. Jackson, when asked the same question years later, smiled that sad, knowing smile he'd perfected. "Life's complicated," he said. "People hurt each other. You move on. But neither of them ever really moved on. Not fully. The music they made afterward carried it. The songs about regret, about missed chances, about loving someone and losing them anyway. The notes were filled with the weight of what they couldn't say. The rehearsal room is probably still there. The amps and cables and worn carpet. Maybe someone else uses it now. Maybe they walk in and out without feeling the ghosts. Maybe they don't know that this is where a friendship ended, where trust shattered, where silence became the only language left. But the people who were there remember. Don Henley remembers. Randy and Bernie remember. They carried it with them through every tour, every album, every moment when someone mentioned Jackson's name and the room got quiet. And somewhere, in the songs that still play on the radio, in the lyrics that people sing without knowing the stories behind them, the truth lives. Not in facts, not in explanations, but in the feeling. In the ache, in the quiet recognition that love and betrayal and loss are woven so tightly together that you can't pull one thread without unraveling everything. The door closed in 1973. Phyllis left in 1976. Glenn Frey died in 2016, carrying secrets he never shared. And Jackson Browne is still here, still writing, still turning pain into something beautiful. The story has no ending, no resolution, no moment where everything makes sense, just the echo of a door closing. And the music that came after